There are things you learn to stop expecting when you marry a man like Seungmin. You stop expecting him to answer on the first ring. You stop expecting dinner at a reasonable hour, explanations that make full sense, or mornings where he's still beside you when the alarm goes off. You learn to fold those expectations up like old receipts and slide them somewhere you won't accidentally find them again. It's not bitterness. Or maybe it is. A little. But mostly it's just the shape your life took, the way water takes the shape of whatever holds it. You adjusted. You told yourself you adjusted. What I hadn't adjusted to, what I still couldn't quite make peace with, even after 2 years of marriage, was the silence. Not the comfortable kind, the other kind. The kind that followed me through the hallways of our penthouse on the 41st floor of a building in downtown Chicago. The kind that sat across from me at the kitchen island on the mornings he wasn't home. The kind that poured itself a cup of coffee and stared back at me from every reflective surface. Seungmin's absence had a texture. It filled rooms. That Tuesday started like most Tuesdays. I woke up alone, which was not unusual. The left side of the bed was cold and undisturbed, which meant he hadn't come home at all. Or he'd come home so late and left so early that sleep had simply been a stop along the way. His pillow still smelled like him, something cedar dark and faintly expensive, and I pressed my face into it for exactly 3 seconds before I caught myself doing it and pulled back. Stop it, Zoe. I had a catering job that morning, a private luncheon on the North Shore. One of those events where women in pearl earrings make polite conversation over poached salmon, and nobody actually eats anything. I'd been building my catering business for 3 years before I met Seungmin and 2 years since, and he'd never once asked me to stop. Some of his associates seemed confused by it. Why does she work? But he never pushed. He simply moved around my schedule the way he moved around most things. Quietly, and with complete awareness. I got dressed in the half-light of the bedroom, pulling my hair back, buttoning my chef's coat, trying not to look at my phone on the nightstand. I'd called him at 11 the night before. Then, at 11:45. His phone had rung each time. I could tell it was ringing, not going straight to voicemail. But there had been nothing. No answer, no call back, no text that said busy. Later, I'm fine. Just the particular silence of a call that someone chooses not to pick up. I picked up my phone. Still nothing. I set it back down. The drive out to Winnetka took 40 minutes, and I spent most of it recalibrating. This was not new behavior. Seungmin had a world that ran parallel to mine, sometimes intersecting and sometimes not. And there were hours, stretches of hours, occasionally whole days, where he simply wasn't reachable. I knew what he was. I'd known before I married him. Though knowing a thing in the abstract and living inside it are entirely different experiences. The difference between reading about cold water and stepping into a lake in November. What I didn't let myself think about, because thinking about it too directly made my chest go tight, was why he hadn't picked up. Not whether he was safe. His security was immaculate. Layers of men and protocols I'd never fully understand. But the other question, the smaller and somehow sharper one, the one that lived underneath the surface of every unanswered call. Who was he with? I hated that question. I hated that I asked it at all. That after everything, the way he looked at me, the way his jaw tensed when another man stood too close to me at a party, the way he'd once ended a business meeting early because I'd sent him a single message saying I don't feel well. I still stood in that uncertain space, still wondered, still felt the low, slow pull of doubt. The luncheon went smoothly. It always did. I was good at this, at the particular choreography of keeping people fed and comfortable and unaware of all the work happening behind the scenes. My assistant Marcus handled the front of house while I ran the kitchen, and for 2 hours I was entirely present, entirely occupied, the noise in my head quieted by the clean, useful focus of doing something I was good at. It was during breakdown, around 2 p.m, while I was loading the van, that I got the call. Not from Seungmin, from a number I didn't recognize, a 312 area code, and something in my stomach moved before I even answered it. A premonition, maybe, or just the accumulated weight of a morning spent waiting. Is this Zoe Han? Han. I'd taken his name. Even now, hearing it from a stranger's mouth did something strange to my pulse. Yes, I said. This is she. This is Mercy General Hospital. We have you listed as the emergency contact for... A brief pause, the rustle of paper. A Marcus Webb. My Marcus. My assistant, who was standing 10 feet away loading folding tables into his car, who was perfectly fine. And then I looked up, and Marcus was looking at me with an expression I didn't understand. A kind of helpless, braced look. And he said, Zoe, it's not me. The woman on the phone continued. There had been an incident. A woman had been brought in by ambulance 40 minutes ago. She had my name and number written on a card in her wallet, listed as emergency contact. Her name was Diane Wells, my mother. The world didn't spin. That's not how it actually feels. It went very still, very flat, like a photograph of itself. I was aware of the van door, cool metal under my palm. I was aware of Marcus saying my name. I was aware of my own breathing, which had gone shallow and too fast. Is she... What happened? She was found unresponsive at her apartment. She's been stabilized, but I'd ask that you come in as soon as possible. I was already moving toward my car. I called Seungmin. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I drove. The hospital was in the South Loop, 40 minutes from Winnetka in afternoon traffic, and I spent those 40 minutes in a particular kind of suspended state, the kind where your hands work and your eyes watch the road, and some functional part of your brain handles the mechanics of driving, while the rest of you is somewhere far away, replaying everything. My mother was 61. She lived alone in Bridgeport, a stubborn, independent woman who called me every Sunday and refused to ask for help with anything. She'd had high blood pressure for years. She always said she was fine. I called Seungmin again at the on-ramp to I-90. It rang, and stopped. I pressed my lips together and did not cry, because I was driving and because I did not have room for it yet. I would process later. I would fall apart later, in some controlled and private way, the way I'd learned to do everything in this marriage, quietly, in corners, with the volume turned down. The hospital lobby was that particular shade of institutional beige that seems designed to communicate seriousness without comfort. I told them who I was at the front desk, and a nurse with tired eyes walked me through 2 sets of double doors and down a corridor that smelled of disinfectant and recycled air, and I kept my hands clasped in front of me, because if I didn't hold on to something, I wasn't sure what I'd do with them. My mother was in a room at the end of the hall. She looked smaller than I remembered. That's always the shock of hospitals, how they reduce people. She had an IV in her arm, and a monitor tracing green lines beside her. And her eyes were closed, and her breathing was audible, and I stood in the doorway for a moment that stretched much longer than it had any right to, before I walked in and sat down beside her and took her hand. She opened her eyes about a minute later. "Zoe," she said. Her voice was rough, but present. "You didn't have to." "Don't," I said. Not unkindly. She didn't. The doctor came in about 20 minutes later and explained what had happened. A hypertensive crisis, blood pressure that had climbed to a dangerous level, a neighbor who'd heard something fall and called 911. She was stable now. She would need observation overnight, possibly longer. There would be medication adjustments, dietary changes, follow-up appointments. I listened to all of it. I asked the right questions. I nodded in the right places. And the whole time, underneath the layer of focused, functional Zoe who took notes on her phone and confirmed insurance information and thanked the doctor with genuine composure, there was the other layer. The one that was aware, with a low and constant ache, that I had called my husband 3 times and he had not answered. That I was sitting in a hospital room with my mother's hand in mine and the chair beside me was empty. It was nearly 5 o'clock when my phone lit up on the bedside table. Seungmin. I looked at it for 1 full ring before I picked up. "Zoe." His voice was low, controlled, the way it always was. but there was something beneath the surface of it, a compression, like pressure behind glass. I'm at Mercy General, I said. My mother had a medical emergency. She's stable. A silence. Not long, but complete. I'm on my way. He hung up before I could respond, before I could say you don't have to, or it's fine, or any of the small, self-protective things I might have said to give myself the option of not needing him. I set the phone down. My mother was watching me from the pillow, her eyes sharper now, the way she got when she was paying attention to something she wasn't going to comment on directly. "He's coming?" she asked. "He's coming," I said. She made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite skepticism, and we sat together in the green-lit quiet of the room, and I listened to the monitor and tried not to count the minutes, and tried not to think about how much it mattered, how much I hadn't wanted it to matter, that he was on his way. He arrived in 18 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock on the wall above my mother's bed, one of those industrial hospital clocks with a thin red second hand that moves in distinct mechanical ticks. And I had been watching it since I hung up the phone, not consciously, not with any particular intention. Just the way your eyes find something to hold on to when the rest of you is trying to stay composed. 18 minutes from a phone call to the doorway of a hospital room on the South Loop at 5 in the afternoon, in Chicago traffic. I didn't want to think about what that meant, about what he'd had to do, or not do, to get here that fast. I heard him before I saw him, not his voice. Seungmin was not a man who announced himself with volume. It was the change in the hallway, a shift in the ambient noise outside the room, a kind of settling, the way a building goes quiet during a sudden drop in pressure. I'd learned to recognize it, the way a corridor full of strangers rearranges itself around a certain kind of presence without understanding why it's doing so. Nurses who'd been moving with practiced efficiency slowed almost imperceptibly. A man talking on his phone near the nurse's station lowered his voice mid-sentence. Small things. The kind of things you only notice if you've been paying attention long enough. Then he was in the doorway. He was still in his suit, charcoal, perfectly fitted, the white shirt open one button at the collar, the edge of the ink on his neck just visible above the fabric. His hair was pushed back. He looked like he'd come directly from somewhere that required him to be immaculate, and despite the speed at which he'd clearly moved to get here, there was nothing disheveled about him. There never was. Seungmin wore control the way other men wore cologne, completely and without thinking about it. His eyes went to my mother first. A quick, assessing sweep, the kind that cataloged and concluded in under a second. Then they moved to me. I had not cried. I want to be clear about that. I had sat in that chair for over an hour, and held my mother's hand, and spoken to doctors and answered questions, and I had not cried, because there was no room for it yet, and because I was not going to do it in a hospital corridor, and because some part of me had simply decided, the way it sometimes does, that the tears were going to have to wait. But when Seungmin looked at me, really looked at me, that particular focused attention he had that made you feel like every other thing in the room had temporarily ceased to exist, something in my chest shifted. A loosening, the kind that's more dangerous than tension. I looked back at the clock. He crossed the room in a few strides, and I felt his hand on my shoulder before I registered he'd moved. Warm, firm, the particular weight of it familiar in a way that bypassed my defenses entirely. He didn't say anything immediately. He just stood behind me with his hand on my shoulder and looked at my mother, who was looking back at him with that expression she reserved for situations she was still forming an opinion about. "Mrs. Wells," he said finally. His voice was quiet, unhurried. "I'm glad you're okay." My mother studied him. "You took your time getting here." The room contracted slightly. I felt my spine straighten, but Seungmin didn't flinch. He never did. "Yes," he said simply. "I did." My mother looked at him a moment longer, then looked at me, and whatever she saw in my face made her adjust her expression into something softer. She settled back against the pillow. "Well, you're here now." He pulled the chair from the corner of the room, not the one I was sitting in, the other one further back, and placed it beside mine and sat down. Not across the room. Right there. Close enough that his arm was almost touching mine. Close enough that I could feel the particular warmth that radiated off him. He didn't reach for my hand. He didn't make a production of anything. He simply sat with me, in that unhurried way of his that I had never fully learned to interpret. Whether it was intentional comfort, or simply the way he occupied any space, completely, and without apology. We stayed with my mother for another hour. He spoke to the attending physician when the doctor came back for evening rounds, asking questions I hadn't thought to ask. Specific, detailed questions about medication interactions and monitoring thresholds that made the doctor look at him with mild surprise and answer more thoroughly than he probably would have otherwise. I watched this happen and felt the familiar dissonance of being married to Seung-min. This simultaneous awareness of how capable and how opaque he was. He handled things, completely, efficiently, without drama. What he did not do was explain himself. My mother fell asleep around 7. The medication made her drowsy, and she went under quickly, her breathing evening out, her hand relaxing in mine until I could set it gently on the blanket without waking her. Seung-min and I sat in silence for a moment. Then I stood up, and he followed me out into the corridor without being asked. The hallway was quieter now, the shift change having settled into its new rhythm, the overhead lights doing that particular evening hospital thing where they seem slightly dimmer and slightly harsher at the same time. I walked a few feet from my mother's door and stopped, and I turned around, and Seung-min was right there, watching me with that dark, still gaze that gave nothing away, and somehow communicated everything. I had planned, in some loose way, to be measured about this, to be adult and practical and not to make a scene in a hospital hallway. I was going to say, why didn't you pick up in a level tone and let him answer and move forward? I called you 3 times, I said. I know. I called you and you didn't answer, and I was driving to a hospital and... I stopped. I pressed my lips together. Measured, Zoe. I needed you to pick up. He looked at me. There was something in his expression that I couldn't quite name. Not quite guilt, which would have required a kind of vulnerability I'd never seen from him, but something adjacent to it. A heaviness. I was in the middle of something that required my full attention, he said. I saw the calls when I was out. Something that required... I stopped again, because my voice had shifted into a register I didn't want it in. Seung-min, my mother... is okay, he said. She's stable. She almost wasn't. A pause. Something moved through his jaw, a small tightening. I know that. Do you? I wasn't being cruel. I genuinely needed to know. Because you knew I was calling and you didn't pick up, and I know what that means. I understand the life. I've always understood the life. But I need to know that when something is actually wrong, when it's actually an emergency. Zoe. My name in his mouth. Just my name, with that particular low gravity he put into it sometimes. It stopped me. He took 1 step toward me. We were close enough now that I had to angle my chin up slightly to hold his gaze, and I wasn't going to look away. Not this time. Not over this. If I had known it was your mother, he said quietly, I would have picked up. You didn't know because you didn't answer. Something shifted in his eyes. A concession. Small, but real. Yes, he said. I exhaled through my nose. It wasn't an apology, not in any conventional sense, but from Seung-min it was the closest structural equivalent, and I had been married to him long enough to recognize it. The acknowledgement, the absence of deflection, the way he stood there and absorbed it without moving back. I was still angry. I want to be clear about that too. But anger, in my marriage, had always coexisted with other things, with the reality of who he was, with everything that coexisted inside caring about him, which was not simple, and had never been simple, and I'd stopped expecting it to be. There was a woman, I said, quietly, carefully. He went very still. Not the comfortable kind of still. The other kind, the kind that preceded a storm or a silence that occupied the space before something significant. His eyes didn't leave mine. "What did you say?" His voice was exactly the same. Exactly the same, measured, low register, but something underneath it had changed. A pressure. Like the atmosphere had shifted 2 degrees in a direction I couldn't name. I held his gaze. "One of your men called the car service last night. I heard it. They asked for a pickup for 2 from the restaurant on Erie. I know which restaurant." He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that the monitor down the hall beeped twice in the silence. "Her name is Park Soyeon," he said finally. "She is my cousin's wife. There was a dinner, business. Her husband was not able to attend." I searched his face. He didn't look away. He didn't elaborate or over-explain, which was, in its own way, information. Seungmin didn't perform innocence. He stated things. "Your cousin's wife," I said. "Yes." I breathed. The thing about standing in the hallway of a hospital after 3 hours of controlled fear is that your ability to maintain armor is significantly reduced. The edges of things became more honest. I looked at my husband, this particular man with his particular gravity, and his neck full of ink, and his eyes that gave everything and nothing simultaneously. And I felt the full, complicated weight of being his. Not just his wife. His. "I don't like not knowing where you are," I said. "I know. It's not about trust. It's..." I paused. Actually, it might be a little about trust. Something moved in his expression that might, in another man, have been the beginning of a smile, a shadow of one. "Okay," he said. "That's all you have to say?" He looked at me for a moment. "No," he said, "but the rest isn't for a hospital hallway." I looked down, then back up. "She's going to need someone to stay with her tonight." "Already arranged," he said. I blinked. "What?" "A private nurse. She'll be here within the hour. Your mother won't have to be alone." I stared at him. At the complete, quiet certainty with which he said it. Not a suggestion, not something he was considering, but something that was already in motion, already handled. The way he always handled things. Completely and without announcement. The anger didn't disappear, but it moved over slightly and made room for something else. "You called someone between the parking garage and this hallway," I said. "From the elevator," he said. I laughed. It came out before I could stop it, short and slightly undone. The laugh of a woman who is still a little furious, and also, helplessly, knows exactly who she married. He watched me laugh. His expression did not change, but his eyes did. Something warming in them, almost imperceptible. The kind of thing you'd miss if you hadn't spent 2 years learning his face. "Come home with me tonight," he said. "The nurse will call if anything changes." I looked back at my mother's door. Then I looked at him. "Okay," I said. The ride home was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the silences I was used to filling with my own thoughts. Seungmin sat beside me in the back of the car. His car, which meant dark leather and tinted windows and a driver named Jin who had worked for him for years and possessed the remarkable ability to be completely invisible despite being 3 feet away. The city moved past the windows in streaks of amber and white, Chicago doing what Chicago does at night, loud and lit and indifferent to anyone's personal crisis. I watched it and tried to locate myself inside the evening, to catalog what had happened and what had been said and what had been left unsaid, which in any conversation with Seungmin was always the longer list. His hand was on mine. He'd done it without ceremony, sometime around the on-ramp to Lakeshore Drive. Just reached across the seat and placed his hand over mine where it rested on my knee. Not gripping, not demanding anything. Just present. I hadn't moved. I'd looked down at it for a moment, his hand over mine, the tattoo ink disappearing into the cuff of his jacket, and then I'd looked back out the window. We didn't speak until we were inside. The penthouse was the way it always was when neither of us had been home for most of the day. That particular stillness of a well-maintained space that exists in suspension, waiting. The lights came on automatically, low and warm, and I set my bag down on the counter and stood in the kitchen for a moment. Not doing anything, just breathing the familiar air of the place. It smelled like the cedar diffuser near the entryway, and faintly, somewhere deeper, like him. I heard him behind me, the soft weight of his jacket being removed, the quiet of him moving through the space he owned completely, the small sounds of an evening arriving. "Are you hungry?" he asked. I turned around. He was at the other end of the kitchen island, jacket gone, sleeves rolled to the elbow, the full geography of the ink on his forearms visible. He was looking at me with that focused attention, the kind that made ordinary questions feel like they carried a secondary meaning. "I don't know," I said honestly. He moved to the refrigerator. I sat on one of the stools at the island and watched him. This man who had people to do everything, who could have called someone and had food here in 20 minutes, choosing to open the refrigerator himself and look at what was inside with the quiet, purposeful expression he brought to everything. He found leftover rice and something I'd made 2 days ago, and he heated both without asking me for input, and I let him. There was something strange about watching Seung-min do ordinary things. It never fully stopped being strange. He existed so completely in the register of controlled power, the suits, the silence, the way rooms organized themselves around his presence, that moments like this one, him standing at the stove in his dress shirt with his sleeves rolled up, always produced a small shift in me. A reminder of the private architecture of him, the parts that existed only in this apartment, only when it was just the two of us. He set a bowl in front of me. "Eat," he said. I ate. We were quiet for a while, the good quiet this time, the kind that didn't need filling. I was hungrier than I'd realized, and the food was warm, and the kitchen was lit softly, and my mother was stable and being watched over, and for a few minutes I let myself simply exist inside the relief of that. Then I set my chopsticks down. "I want to talk about this morning," I said. He was still eating, unhurried, but his eyes came up to mine. "Not about my mother," I clarified. "About the calls, about..." I stopped, tried to find the right starting place. "About the fact that I've been feeling like I'm on the outside of my own marriage." Something changed in his posture. Not a withdrawal. Seung-min didn't withdraw. Not physically, but a shift in quality, an increased attention. "Say what you mean," he said. It wasn't harsh. With him, it never was. It was simply his way. He didn't want circumlocution. He wanted the actual thing, stated plainly, and despite everything, I respected that about him. It was one of the qualities that made him impossible to manage, and also impossible not to trust when he finally gave you something direct. "I feel like a guest sometimes," I said, "in your life, in this apartment. Like I'm allowed to be here because you decided I could be, but the actual contents of your world, where you are, who you're with, what's happening, I find out by accident or not at all. And I know what I married into. I have never pretended otherwise. But Seung-min..." I pressed my palms flat on the counter. "I needed you today, in an uncomplicated, simple human way. My mother was in an ambulance, and I needed to hear your voice, and you didn't pick up." He set his own chopsticks down. "And the thing that I can't stop thinking about," I continued, because I was already in it, already past the point of careful management, "is that I don't know if you didn't pick up because you couldn't, or because you chose not to. And I don't know which one is worse." The kitchen was very quiet. Seung-min looked at me for a long moment. That look that saw everything and disclosed nothing, that I had spent 2 years trying to read. Then he said, "I was in a meeting, the kind that doesn't stop." "I know." There were people in that room who would have read the interruption as weakness, the kind of weakness that has consequences. "I know that too. And I still..." He paused. Just briefly, just a fraction of a second. But I caught it, Because I was watching for it. I should have found a way. I looked at him. Not the phone, he said. Something. I should have had someone check. His jaw moved. I didn't think it was... He stopped. An emergency, I said. Yes. Because I call and you don't answer and nothing is usually wrong. A pause. Yes. There it was. Not comfortable, not easy, but real. The honest mechanics of what had developed between us, without either of us fully deciding it should. I had called and been ignored enough times that an unanswered call had stopped reading as significant, even to him. That was not entirely his fault. That was the shape we had let things take. I don't want to be the wife who calls and gets ignored, I said. I don't want to be someone you check on when it's convenient. You're not. Then I need you to act like it. He held my gaze. Okay, he said. Just okay. What else do you want me to say? I started, then laughed despite myself, a tired sound. I want you to tell me what I am to you. Because sometimes you look at me like I'm the only thing in the room, and sometimes I call 3 times and you don't answer, and I can't hold both of those things and know which one is true. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up, slowly, and came around the island. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to keep looking at him, close enough that I could see the detail of the ink at his collar, the particular way he was looking at me now. Both of them are true, he said. I frowned. That doesn't... I am not easy, he said. I know that. I have never pretended otherwise. His voice was low and unhurried, each word placed with that deliberate weight he used when he was saying something real. But there is not a room I walk into where I am not aware of where you are. There is not a man who looks at you longer than he should that I don't notice. There is not a morning I leave this apartment that I don't. He stopped. I waited. You are not a guest, he said. You are the reason I come back. The kitchen was very still. I looked at him. At this man who had once had someone quietly removed from a charity gala because he'd put his hand on my back without invitation, who tracked my location not with anything intrusive, but with a quality of attention that meant he always knew, who had been in my mother's hospital room for 3 hours without complaint, and arranged a private nurse from an elevator. And I felt something in my chest do what it always did around him, eventually. That particular shift, that loosening that was also a tightening. Then why do you make it so hard to feel that? I asked. Because I don't know how not to, he said simply. That is not an excuse. It's the truth. I exhaled. I wanted to stay angry. I want to be honest about that. There was a part of me that had been building this feeling for months, maybe longer. A careful architecture of grievance that I had tended and organized, and I was not ready to simply set it down because he'd said something true in the kitchen at 9 o'clock on the worst Tuesday I'd had in recent memory. But I also, and this was the part I could never fully armor against, believed him. The woman from Erie Street, I said. A different tone now, quieter. Something moved in his eyes. Not guilt. I was becoming more certain of that. Something more like recognition, like he had been expecting this to circle back. She called you, I said. It wasn't a question. I'd seen the notification on his watch earlier in the car, just a glimpse, a name, before he'd tilted his wrist away. He met my gaze. She did. I didn't answer. I let that sit for a moment. Seung-min, I said carefully. Is there something I need to know? He held my gaze for a long, unbroken moment. Then, no, there is not. Then why does she have your number? Because her husband does business with me and she has had access to my contact information for 2 years. That is all it is. His voice was even, flat with certainty. I understand what you're asking. The answer is no. I searched his face. He didn't look away. He didn't shift or add qualifiers or produce the particular kind of smoothness that came with deception. He was simply there, in front of me, as still and direct as he ever was. I nodded once. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, a small, quiet gesture, his fingers barely grazing my jaw, there and gone. It was such a gentle thing from a man who was not especially gentle, and it undid more of my armor than anything he'd said. "Come to bed," he said. "It's been a long day." It had been a long day. One of the longer ones, measured in the particular currency of fear and relief, an honest conversation in a hospital hallway, and then this kitchen. I slid off the stool. "We're not done talking about this," I said. "I know," he said. He said it like he meant it. I didn't sleep well, but I slept. That's the most honest way to describe it. Not the deep, untroubled kind, but the functional kind. The kind your body insists on after a day that has wrung it out. I woke up twice. The first time it was just past 2 in the morning and the room was dark, and Seungmin was beside me, his breathing slow and even, his arm a warm weight across my waist. I lay there for a few minutes cataloging the sensation of it, the particular solidity of him, the way he slept with the same controlled presence he carried when he was awake, like even unconsciousness was something he did on his own terms. The second time I woke up, he was gone. The clock said 4:47. The left side of the bed was warm, which meant he hadn't been up long. I lay there and listened to the apartment and heard nothing. No voices, no movement. And then I saw the light under the bedroom door, faint and steady. The low lamp in the living room, not the sharp blue of a phone screen, the actual lamp. I got up. He was on the couch, not with a phone or a laptop, just sitting in the amber light, with a glass of water on the coffee table in front of him, and his elbows on his knees, looking at something in the middle distance that had nothing to do with the wall he was facing. He was in a dark t-shirt and sweatpants, the private version of him, the one that only existed inside these walls. And he didn't look alarmed when I appeared in the doorway, which meant he'd heard me coming. He always heard things coming. "Can't sleep?" I asked. "I was thinking," he said. I came and sat on the other end of the couch, pulling my feet up, wrapping my arms around my knees. The city outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was doing its 4 in the morning thing. Not quiet exactly, never fully quiet in Chicago, but a different frequency, lower and more sparse, the night shift of the world. "About what?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Not the deflecting kind of quiet. I was learning slowly to tell the difference. This was the considering kind. "My father never came home," he said. I waited. Not the way I mean it now. He came home, but he was not present. When he was there, he was somewhere else. He picked up the glass of water, turned it slightly, set it back down. I told myself for a long time that it was the work, that the work required it, that the cost of operating the way we operate is a certain kind of absence, and the people who love you understand that, or they leave. "Seungmin." "I'm not finished," he said. Not sharply, just a statement. I closed my mouth. I told myself you understood it, that you chose this, and so the shape of it was acceptable. He paused. "Last night, in the hospital, watching you sit next to your mother, you'd been there for hours alone, and you weren't angry in the way people are when they want to fight. You were..." He stopped. "What?" I asked quietly. "Tired," he said. "The kind of tired that's been building for a while. And I recognized it, not from you, from my mother." He set the glass down. "I don't want to be my father." The apartment was very still around us. I looked at him, at the side of his face in the low light, the sharp jaw, the ink at his neck, the particular quality of someone who has said something they are not accustomed to saying. Seungmin did not traffic in vulnerability. He dealt in strength and silence and control, and everything honest from him arrived slowly, with considerable weight, like it had fought its way through layers to reach the surface. That's the most you've ever told me, I said. About your family. Yes, he said. Why now? He turned and looked at me. Because you asked me last night if I could change. And I said okay. And okay is not enough. I absorbed that. What does enough look like? I asked. He considered it. Genuinely. Visibly. That rare thing, Seungmin thinking something through in real time, in front of me, without editing the process. I answer when you call, he said. Not every call is possible. But I find a way. A message. Someone who checks. He paused. And I tell you more. Tell me more, I repeated. Not everything. There are things I can't. His voice was matter-of-fact about it, not apologetic, which I actually appreciated more than apology would have been. But more than I have been. You should not be finding out about dinner companions from car service calls. I felt something in my chest shift. No, I agreed. I shouldn't. I should have told you about Soyeon. It was nothing, but the fact that it became something in your mind is my fault. I looked at my hands. I don't love feeling like that, I said. The jealousy. It's not. I don't want to be that person. You're not jealous without reason, he said. I gave you reasons. Through absence, not action. There's a difference, but the result is the same. I looked at him. When did you get this articulate about feelings? Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of one, the warmest version of him. I've been thinking about it since the hospital, he said. I had time. I uncurled slightly, turning toward him. I'm scared sometimes, I said. Not of you, of the life, of what it could cost. I paused. My mother was lying in a hospital bed yesterday, and my first coherent thought was that I was facing it alone. Not because I am alone, I know I'm not, but because that's how it's felt, and I don't want it to keep feeling that way. He reached over and took my hand. Not the way he had in the car. That had been steadying, a kind of anchor. This was different. His thumb moved across my knuckles slowly, and he held my hand the way you hold something you're paying attention to. It won't, he said. You can't promise that. No, he agreed, but I can promise the effort. He looked at me steadily. That I can give you. I believed him. That was the thing about Seungmin. He didn't make promises he had no intention of keeping. He didn't perform commitment. When he said something, the words arrived already load-bearing, already structural. He had told me I was the reason he came back, and he'd said it the way he said everything real, without drama, without looking away, without adding anything that would soften or cushion it. Just the thing itself, plainly. We sat like that for a while, his hand over mine, the city doing its quiet early morning murmur outside. Tell me something, I said eventually. Something about you that I don't know. He looked at me sideways. That's a broad request. Start anywhere. A pause, then. I used to draw, he said. I blinked. Draw. Architecture. Buildings, mostly. When I was a teenager. He said it simply, without embarrassment, which made it more startling somehow than if he'd been reluctant about it. I was good at it. I thought about studying it. What happened? My father happened, he said. Just that. Just those 4 words. And the weight they carried was sufficient. I didn't need the full story to understand the shape of it. Do you still? I asked. No. A pause. Sometimes I think about it. I looked at him. At this man who ran a criminal organization across 3 states, who had people who would step in front of things for him, who controlled rooms with stillness, and whose name made other dangerous men careful, and who had once been a teenage boy who drew buildings and thought about a different future. I didn't know that, I said. No, he said. You didn't. It wasn't accusatory. It was an acknowledgement of distance, of the architecture of our silences, of what 2 years of circling each other carefully had not produced. Space where there should have been something else. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. We both looked at it. The screen showed the number for Mercy General, the nurse, a woman named Patricia, who had called once already around midnight just to confirm she'd arrived and my mother was resting comfortably. I picked up immediately. "Ms. Hahn, it's Patricia. I'm sorry to call at this hour." My chest tightened. "Your mother is awake and asking for you." "She's fine," she added quickly. "Vitals are stable, no cause for concern. She's quite insistent. She says she won't go back to sleep until she talks to you." I exhaled. Jungmin's hand tightened briefly on mine. "Tell her I'll be there in the morning," I said. "First thing. I'll let her know." A pause, and then quieter. "She also said to tell you that your husband has good eyes." A beat. "I don't know what that means, but she seemed to think you would." I looked at Jungmin. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "Thank her for me," I said, and hung up. "Good eyes," he repeated. "My mother notices things," I said. "It's her primary hobby." He considered this. "She doesn't trust me," he said. "Not wounded by it, just observing." "She doesn't trust easily," I said. "Neither do I." And yet, I agreed. The city outside was shifting. That barely perceptible change in light that happens well before sunrise. A lightening of the dark rather than actual light. The night loosening its hold by degrees. I was tired again. The good kind. The kind that meant sleep would actually come this time. "Come back to bed," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he stood, and I stood. And he kept my hand. And we walked back through the quiet apartment together. Through the low light. Past the kitchen where the dishes from dinner were still in the drying rack. Back to the bedroom where the sheets were still warm from before. He did not let go of my hand until we were lying down. And this time, when I closed my eyes, the silence in the room felt different. Not the empty kind. Not the kind that pressed against my edges. Something more like held. Something more like shared. I was still a little afraid. I'm going to be honest about that. I was still aware of the life, its edges and its shadows, the cost of loving a man whose world had sharp corners everywhere. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted position, from the center of the room to somewhere nearer the wall, less dominant, less defining. I fell asleep, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't wake up again until morning. My mother was sitting up in bed when I arrived. Not just awake, fully, deliberately upright, her reading glasses on, a cup of hospital tea on the tray table in front of her, looking like a woman who had decided that a hypertensive crisis was not going to dictate the terms of her morning. Patricia, the nurse, gave me a look from the doorway that communicated both professional admiration and mild exasperation. The particular expression of someone who had spent the night being managed by a patient who was technically supposed to be resting. "You look better," I said. "I feel better," my mother said. "Sit down." I sat. Jungmin had driven me and was somewhere downstairs. He'd offered to come up and I'd said maybe later. Not because I wanted to keep him away, but because I knew my mother. And I knew that whatever she had decided to say to me this morning required privacy. She had that look. The one that meant she had been lying in a hospital bed since yesterday afternoon assembling her thoughts, and now she was prepared to deliver them. I poured myself a cup of water from the pitcher on the tray. She looked at me over her glasses. "You slept," she said. "I did. You look different when you've actually slept. More like yourself." She picked up her tea. "He was good last night, the way he handled the doctor." "He's good at handling things," I said carefully. "I noticed." She took a sip. "I also noticed the way he watched you when you weren't looking." I kept my expression neutral. "Mom, I'm not making a case," she said. "I'm reporting what I saw. There's a difference." She set the cup down. He watches you the way your father used to watch me. Like you're the thing in the room that matters most, and he's running a continuous background check to make sure you're still okay." She paused. "Your father was also a man who was sometimes not reachable, who had a world that didn't fully include me. And I spent a lot of years being angry about that before I understood it wasn't absence. It was just the shape of him." I looked at her. "I'm not saying it's easy," she said. "I'm not saying you shouldn't ask for more. I'm saying the look is real. Whatever else is complicated, the look is real." I exhaled slowly. "He told me things last night, about his father, about how he doesn't want to repeat certain patterns." My mother nodded once, the way she did when she was filing information. "Did you believe him?" "Yes," I said. "I did." "Then you have something to work with." She reached over and patted my hand. Once, firm, the way she'd done since I was small. "The question was never whether he cared about you. I figured that out in the first 5 minutes yesterday. The question was whether he knew how to show it in ways you could actually feel. That's a learned thing, Zoe. That's not something people come with." I thought about Sungmin on the couch at 4 a.m, turning a glass of water in his hands, telling me about his father, about buildings, about the teenage version of himself who had wanted something different, before the life closed certain doors and opened others, about the effort he was promising, careful and unadorned, not wrapped in softness but real. "He said he used to draw," I said. "Architecture, as a kid." My mother looked at me for a moment. "Did he?" "I didn't know that. 2 years and I didn't know that." "That's the work," she said simply. "That's what you do now. Learn each other forward, not just sideways." I smiled despite myself. That doesn't entirely make sense. "It will," she said. "Give it time." The doctor came in around 9 and delivered a verdict that was both reassuring and directive. My mother's pressure had stabilized significantly overnight. Her response to the adjusted medication was positive, and she could be discharged the following morning, provided she committed to a strict new protocol: follow-up appointments, dietary changes, a monitor that would track her pressure daily, and send the readings to her cardiologist. My mother listened to all of this with the expression of a woman who was already internally negotiating which parts of the protocol she intended to follow and which ones she would interpret flexibly. "I'll make sure she follows it," I said. My mother looked at me. "You'll try." "I'll succeed," I said, "because if you end up back here, I will move into your apartment." She opened her mouth. "I will," I said. "I will be there every morning. I will reorganize your kitchen." "You wouldn't dare." "Salt shaker first," I said. She pressed her lips together, but her eyes were warm. "Fine," she said. "I'll follow the protocol." I went downstairs to find Sungmin. He was in the lobby, which was both exactly where I expected him and slightly remarkable. He occupied the waiting area of a public hospital with the same quality of settled authority he brought to every space, seated near the window, one arm resting on his knee, his phone in his hand. The 2 men who were always somewhere in his vicinity, never introduced, never acknowledged, simply present, were positioned at unobtrusive distances, performing the art of looking like nobody in particular. He stood when he saw me coming. "She's being discharged tomorrow morning," I said when I reached him. "She's okay." Something in his posture released, not visibly, not dramatically, but I felt it, the fractional shift that meant something had been held and was now being set down. "Good," he said. "She wants to see you before we leave," I said. I told her maybe, which means yes, but I wanted to warn you. He looked at me steadily. "What does she want?" "Probably to look at you in direct lighting and ask you something uncomfortable," I said. "She does that." "All right," he said. I looked at him. "You don't have to be nervous. She already told me you have good eyes. You told me last night." She told the nurse to tell me. "There's a difference," It means she's been thinking about it. I watched him. She's not easy to get approval from. I want you to know that. I'm not looking for approval, he said. No, I agreed. That's probably part of why you're getting it. He looked at me for a moment with that particular expression, the one where his face was still and his eyes were doing everything, warm and focused and completely present. Then he said, "How are you?" Not how is your mother or is everything handled. How are you? I thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. Tired, I said, relieved, still processing. I paused. Better than yesterday. Better than yesterday is enough, he said. We went back upstairs. My mother received Seungmin the way she received everything she'd already made a private decision about, with measured graciousness and a specific quality of attention that meant she was watching for confirmation of what she'd concluded. She asked him 2 questions, one about the private nurse, which he answered plainly, and one about his intentions regarding her daughter, which would have made a lesser man shift in his seat. He didn't shift. She is my wife, he said. My priority. What happened yesterday won't happen again. My mother regarded him for a long moment. See that it doesn't, she said. And that was, apparently, that. We left the hospital at noon. I looked back once from the entrance, up at the face of the building, at the window I thought might be my mother's floor, and felt the particular relief of a fear that had passed through its worst possibility and come out the other side. She was okay. She was difficult and stubborn and already negotiating her protocol, which meant she was entirely herself, which meant she was fine. Seungmin's hand was at the small of my back as we walked to the car. Not gripping, just there. The weeks that followed were not a transformation. I want to be clear about that. Life with Seungmin did not suddenly become simple or uncomplicated, and I would not have believed it if it had. The sharp corners of his world were still there. There were still evenings when I didn't know exactly where he was, still nights that ran later than planned, still the low-frequency awareness of living inside a life that had weight and consequence I couldn't always see. But things changed in the ways he had promised they would. He answered when I called. Not every single time. There were still moments that were genuinely impossible, and on those occasions I would get a message within minutes, short and direct, in a meeting. 1 hour. Or his head of security, a quiet man named Dae, would call me from a blocked number and say simply, "Mr. Han is occupied. He'll reach you within the hour." It was not romantic. It was practical and consistent, which was, from Seungmin, its own language of care. He told me things, not everything. He'd been honest about what was possible, and I'd accepted the boundary. Because there was a difference between secrecy and discretion, and I was learning to trust that he understood the difference too. But he told me about the meeting he'd been in when I called that Tuesday, not the details, but the shape of it, the weight of what had been at stake. He told me about Soyeon and her husband, about the business that connected them, about why the dinner had been necessary. Small disclosures that accumulated into something larger than their individual parts. He told me more about his father. That came slowly, in pieces, over the course of several evenings, on the couch, late, the city outside doing its patient Chicago thing. His father had been meticulous and cold, and had built something significant, and left very little warmth in the architecture of it. Seungmin had inherited the structure, and spent years deciding which parts of the blueprint to follow, and which ones to quietly revise. He was still revising, I understood. Still in the middle of a long, private process of becoming someone different from the man who had raised him, while operating inside the world that man had built. I began to understand him differently. Not completely. I don't think complete understanding of Seungmin was a realistic goal, and I'd stopped wanting it to be. But differently. With more texture, more accuracy, more of the actual person behind the controlled surface. My mother came to dinner 6 weeks after the hospital. She sat at our dining table in the penthouse she'd never visited before, and looked at the city through the windows, and made a sound that might have been impressed, but that she would have denied under questioning. Seungmin made her tea, the specific kind she'd mentioned once, briefly, in the hospital. And she noticed, and she looked at him over the cup with her evaluating eyes, and something in her expression settled. After she left, I stood at the window looking at the lights. Seungmin came and stood beside me. "She approves," I said. "I know," he said. "You don't have to sound so certain." "I brought the right tea," he said. A simple statement. But there was something underneath it. The fact that he had paid attention, had remembered, had quietly made sure. The fact that it mattered to him, not because my mother's approval changed anything structural, but because she mattered to me, and I mattered to him. And the logic flowed from there without requiring announcement. I leaned into him slightly. Not dramatically, not with any particular production, just a degree or two in his direction. His arm came around me, unhurried, and we stood at the window together and looked at Chicago doing what Chicago does, loud and lit and enormous, entirely indifferent to any one life being lived inside it. I was still afraid sometimes. That was honest, and I owned it. But fear, I was learning, doesn't have to be the loudest thing in the room. It can be present and real, and take its place in the full picture of a life, alongside everything else. Alongside relief and warmth, and the particular solidity of someone's arm around you at the end of a long day. Alongside the slow, unglamorous, necessary work of learning another person. Alongside the understanding that love, in its actual form, is rarely the thing you expected, and almost always the thing you needed. The city glittered. I stayed where I was.